I'm Reverend Bonnie, the community spiritual leader here at the center, and it's my great joy to kick off a new month. Can you believe it's August? Where did the summer go? It's okay. It's all good. Yeah, it's all good. Well, last month in July, we had a Q&A Sunday, and there were several questions that didn't get answered. And one of those questions I felt fit really well in with what I wanted to say this morning. So I'm going to read the question first of all. What does our philosophy believe about social justice and taking action related to that? And should politics be discussed from the pulpit? Well, yes and no and yes and well, I think we need to explore this a little more, and it, like I said, it fits right in with what I wanted to talk about this morning. First of all, whatever you hear from this platform on Sunday morning needs to be in alignment with what we teach. And what we teach, I think, overall, is oneness. We heard in the reading that great one mind expresses as the many. So we teach oneness. So if what is shared up here is in connection with that, how do we separate out what's our personal expression from the one, that political from the personal, personal from the political, and how do we determine what's appropriate to be said from up here and what isn't? This month, our focus is on being centers of God's activity. So when we talk about a center, what I'm looking at is the middle, that center place. If all that activity is going on out there, the center is the hub, that place where it's calm in the middle, that place where we can connect with our true center, that locus of God activity and where it takes place. And we can explore that in regard to the personal, how it is that each one of us is a center for God's activity, and how we as a collective group right here in this Center for Spiritual Living, we are a center for God's activity. So then, what do we mean by God's activity? In my mind, we're looking at the God qualities and how they're active through us. So if we're looking at the quality of love, that can be active through us in the form of welcoming, how welcoming we are to new people when they show up. It's through us in the form of non-judgmentalism. It comes through us through our open heart. If we're looking at the quality of peace, it's the level of calm that we maintain, that we learn how to respond to people as opposed to reacting to people. It's that peace that we have within when we're free from anger and fear. If we're looking at the quality of givingness, it's that exchange of energy that we share here between each other, and that way that we allow Spirit to move through us, knowing that as we give, so we receive. So that givingness flows in and through us. And if we're looking at that creative quality of Spirit, we're looking at that which creates newness and difference and even change. And so as a center of God's activity, whether it's personal or collective, right here, right now, it's where God qualities move through us and become active in the world. And so to answer that question even further, when you want to know what is social justice for you and what activities to take for you, we don't teach you that. What we teach you is how to connect with that God in you and to listen to what is moving through you and what activity wants to take place through you. We trust that each and every one of you, as a center of God's activity, can figure that out on your own. Prior to Ernest Holmes' transition, he witnessed this movement of religious science very sadly, I think, move into a split. He watched what he had created go down two different pathways. There was Religious Science International, known as RSI, and there was the United Church of Religious Science, or UCRS. And so he had to watch all his teachings about unity and oneness as the movement moved apart. And the split was not about what we teach. It wasn't over the principles or the philosophy. It wasn't about the what of who we are. It was about the how we were going to move the movement forward. It was about the how the business was going to be run and how the organization was going to work. 60 years later, our movement pulled itself back together. And when we did that, we created a new name and a new way of doing business. And so now we're known as the Centers for Spiritual Living. So, as we heard in the reading, Ernest Holmes taught oneness. He taught that each one of us are an individualized expression of the one, and that there are innumerable persons out there expressing that God's Spirit in and through us. Presently, I believe that our United States are experiencing a similar split to what our movement did all those years ago. We're having internal politics that are creating a split around the what. Not around the what so much. We want to be the United States, but around the how. How are we going to get where we want to go? How are we going to create this world that we want to see? How is the organization going to be run? Now, I know I'm simplifying something that's way bigger, but just hang with me as I go through this. Because about a week ago, I was invited to go to lunch by somebody who I absolutely adore, I love deeply and respect very much. And this person was troubled because this person realized that we were coming from different places politically, and yet we are part of the whole here in this community. And so what we realized as we sat down to lunch together is we care about each other so much that we really wanted to listen and hear the other person's point of view. I really wanted to understand what this person was thinking, and this person wanted to understand what I was thinking. And as we listened to each other, it became apparent that there were many whats that we agreed on. It was the how to bring those whats about in our culture and in our society where we differed. So some of those whats were, we want to feel safe in the world, and we want our children safe in schools. The how to go about it differed in whether we need more guns or we need less guns or no guns. The what that we shared is that we want more abundance in our lives and in our society. The how to get it differed in whether we should improve and bolster social services or whether we need to create ways and require that all people that get something from the government work for what they get. The what that we agreed on was that we want inner peace and we want peace in the world. The how we go about getting it differed in regard to whether we want stronger borders and possibly even a wall, or whether we want stronger alliances and no wall. So what we discovered as we took the time to talk to each other is that we shared a lot in common in regard to what it is we want to experience in our world. And so here at this center, as a spiritual center of God's activity, how do we raise our level of activity so that it supersedes all of the hows, and so that we can continue to focus on the what it is that we want to see in our world, even when the how we think we should get there might differ between us. In this month's, or actually in June's Science of Mind magazine, Ernest Holmes has an article in here from what we believe about this thing called life. So these are his words that are in the June Science of Mind magazine. Everyone has a personality, be it good, bad, or indifferent. But in back of this personality is a divine, God-ordained individual, a real person, a spiritual ego. Too often, our objective and even our mental and emotional personalities tend to mask or cover rather than reveal that unique something which the mind of God has implanted within each and every one of us. To find our true center is one of the great quests of life. To discover God within is the greatest thing that could happen to anyone. The miracle that follows such discovery changes the whole personality. A new power surges into it through the revelation of the divine presence at the center of its own being. Since I've been coming here to the Center for Spiritual Living, and since I've been serving here, this congregation has repeatedly expressed the desire for different speakers to speak from this platform. I believe that means that we're highly evolved as a community. And seriously, I believe that as a center of God's activity, we're not comfortable with one point of view. That's just way too easy for us. Now, I also realized it could also mean that many of you are happy to have one Sunday off when the person you don't want to hear speak is speaking. But I also choose to believe that it's because we're, as a community, open to difference. We are open to different points of view. We're open to looking at ourselves within when we butt up against that difference and looking at where we're comfortable and where we're not comfortable. And that willingness to look at where we're not comfortable means that we're comfortable enough in who we are, that we've evolved enough in our own growth and our own spirituality, that we're willing to listen to someone different than us. And we're willing to listen and allow where we are and where we're comfortable to stretch a little bit. So to return to that original question, what do we believe about social justice and taking action and whether we should speak politically from the platform or not? I will go back to the original answer. If it's in alignment with oneness, if we're teaching oneness from what it is that's being spoken up here, then we are in alignment with what can be spoken from up here. If I'm talking about how God moves in and through my life, if I am sharing and talking about difference from the perspective of being curious and not from judgment, and if I'm talking about what we stand for through our belief and our philosophy, and not criticizing. Now, I know sometimes we hear criticism, but we should not be criticizing anyone from this platform. Anyone. Because when the political, as the personal, starts to divide, we've moved out of alignment. When it's seeking that oneness, when it's teaching oneness, then we are in alignment. We also have bylaws, just to further answer that, and the bylaws say that nothing said from here on this platform is supposed to try and influence how you vote. That is not okay for us to do. And hopefully that has never happened. I don't remember ever hearing that from up here. Again, we assume you know how to figure that out for yourself, that we don't have to tell you how to do that, that you go within, touch that inner divine, and then you take action accordingly. What I also know, though, is that we're not the only center who is exploring these questions. We're not the only center with diversity in our membership. This month's Science of Mind magazine has an article by Reverend Petra Weldris, and the article is called "Including Those Who Don't Include Us." Part of what they have in their CSL Dallas statement of their purpose is that they want to practice radical inclusivity. And the way she's defining radical inclusivity is that they're learning how to include people in their circle of love, in their circle of their community, who might not accept everything about who each individual is. So how do we include those people who might not accept everything about me, or who might not be comfortable with everything about me, or might not even want to include me? It's also talking about her family and the issues that she has with some of her family members and how she continues to include them in her circle, even though they don't want to include her. So the article is worth reading. She concludes with 5 steps, practices to include those who don't include us. And one of those is to consider if there's anyone that you've excluded from your life or your circle, and to examine if you're disagreeing with their ideas or if you're judging them as a person. To just look at that. Who in your life have you excluded from your circle of love? Who in your life can you include by accepting behaviors and ideas that you happen to disagree with? She's got other ones. Explore how comfortable you are with listening to someone with different ideas. Can you examine their ideas without questioning their reason or their heart? I'm not going to read all of them, but she concludes with, explore the difference between seeing the truth in someone and accepting ideas or behaviors that you disagree with. Excluding someone's Facebook post, she says, is not the same as kicking them out of your circle of love. You are free to create healthy, authentic boundaries for yourself without implying that someone else is outside of the love of God. So we can recognize within the whole that there might be some difference. So as I was traveling this summer, I spoke to another minister in a part of the country where I know there has to be diversity, or at least there was within her congregation. I said, how did you handle that? How did you handle the differences of opinion about how things are done? And she actually said, well, I ran off all those who don't agree with me. That's an option. But that's not an option that I've chosen as the community spiritual leader here, and I don't believe it's an option that this community wants. Maybe I'm being idealistic, but I truly believe that your openness to hearing different points of views and different speakers also means that you're open to having different people within this congregation, that you're open to exploring those differences among each other, and that because most likely discomfort will arise, when discomfort arises, that on some level we've agreed to do the inner work and to look at where does that discomfort come from and what can we do with it. As centers of God's activity, we are each personally centers of love that radiates out from us into the world. We're each centers of light that we bring into situations and carry with us out into the world. So if and when we become angered or our buttons get pushed, that's an opportunity to look within, to reconnect with the divine within ourselves, and ask ourselves, what created that button to begin with? How was I raised? What values have I taken on? And that's why I'm feeling with whatever's going on around me. And then we can start to consider, how might a different perspective have been created? What might have created that other perspective on how we might get from here to there and the things that we want to see in the world? And then within the privacy and the sanctuary of our own mind and our own inner thoughts, we can dare to try on different points of view, to consider, what would it be like if this is what I thought, or this is what I believe? How might that have come to be in the world? Ernest Holmes says in the Science of Mind text, it is all the same, one substance in the universe taking different forms and shapes and becoming different things. Unity is expressed through multiplicity. And in another place he says, unity without uniformity. So I think that each time we find ourselves uncomfortable with difference, it's an opportunity to explore where our comfort ends and where that discomfort begins. Where does our theory of oneness butt up against the discomfort of the reality of what we're experiencing in the world? When I was a kid, my grandfather said, birds of a feather flock together. He was expressing to me his comfort with being around people who were like him and his discomfort of being around people who weren't like him. At that point in my growing up, he was referring to race. He preferred that my aunt not date a person of a different race. And he was trying to emphasize to me, birds of a feather flock together. You don't see that mixing between birds going on. So, where does our comfort with sameness end and our discomfort with difference begin? Where do we say, well, it's okay if you do X, Y, and Z, but do it over there. Don't do it in my space or near me? How does unity without uniformity express? And then I started wondering if uniformity is just sort of a natural outcome of togetherness. So once we all come together, do we want everyone to be the same? Do we want us to all be uniform? Or can we have unity and togetherness without uniformity? Can we appreciate and respect the differences in each other? As a center of God's activity, Where and when you are more comfortable with your own kind, and where and when you're comfortable rubbing elbows with difference is something to start considering and looking at. Maybe you're not even comfortable rubbing elbows with difference, but where are you willing to do that? Difference can take many forms. Obviously, it can be gender, race, age, socioeconomic status, where we were raised, what we were raised learning, sexual orientation, possibly whether we're in recovery or whether we're around people who never even had to go to recovery. There's so many things. How we dress, the color of our eyes, anything. Difference can be a lot of different things, and all of those things can create comfort or discomfort within us. What's important, I think, is that we start to become aware of where our comfort pushes up against that discomfort. What I started seeing is each one of us as little centers of light. So maybe I'm a little red light and you're a little blue light. And of course, as we spread our light out and it overlaps, you get my favorite color, purple. As we allow our center of light to spread and overlap with what's different, we create something new. Just like the Centers for Spiritual Living created a new name, we got a new place as our hub. We moved from California to Denver area. We created newness out of the differences that had been there when we brought ourselves together as a movement. And I think as people, we can do the same thing. As we let our light shine and move out, and we're willing to let it overlap with difference, what happens when all those colors keep overlapping and overlapping and overlapping? We just get white light, right? When all the color goes together, it creates light. That's what happens when we let ourselves overlap with difference. My throat's hanging in there. So this summer, I had an experience that I'd never had before. I went to prison. I went to prison because I was invited to go see a play that the men in the prison had put on, that we're going to put on. I got to go with my two aunts, they're partners. My one aunt takes music and choirs into the prisons, and so she knew the person that was doing the plays with the guys in the prison. So I was invited to go, and I tell you what, getting into prison is quite an ordeal. I had to have ID, I had to take everything out of my pockets. We went through a door and we were held in a place where this was locked and this locked behind us, then this opened, then there was another lock and that locked and we got in here. I mean, it took, maybe 20 minutes to a half hour just to get in to the room where the guys were going to do the play for us. But when the doors opened and we went into the room with the guys who were going to do the play, we were greeted with smiles. We were greeted by the most warm individuals I think I've ever met. They shook our hands. They were so grateful that we went through what we did to get there so that we could observe their play and watch their play. They talked to us. They were clearly wanting to connect on a deep level with every one of us who went in to see this play. Then we eventually sat down. We watched the play. After the play, we were allowed to ask them questions. And then they had different topics that we could go and talk to different ones of them about that we might have questions about in regard to the play and what they were doing and their lives, essentially. And so at that point, again, I got to meet with individual guys and connect on a level that was just incredible for me. A depth of eye contact, a depth of connection, a depth of sharing. Some of them had been in there 20, 30 years. I had no idea why they were there. The fact that I was able to go there and be so deeply touched was nothing short of a miracle for me. Because, like I said, I had no idea why they were there. I don't know whether they raped someone. I don't know whether they killed someone or robbed from someone, but that didn't matter. In that moment, we were human to human, connecting spirit to spirit. It was unbelievable. And I walked out of there so filled. And the reason I say it was nothing short of a miracle is because when I was in college, I had been accepted to go to Chicago Theological Seminary after I graduated. I was ready to head off to the big city when my roommate got raped. I was filled with so much rage and so much anger that thankfully I've never experienced it since, and I hadn't experienced it prior. As I was preparing to go to Chicago, I was having violent dreams where I was perpetrating violence on the men that came anywhere near me in Chicago. I can't even explain it. Like what often happens when there's a prejudice that's created, I spread out over all men the actions of the one. And the anger was just percolating. Needless to say, I decided it wasn't a good idea for me to go to Chicago. So I never went to that seminary. And I started on a journey, a spiritual journey, that after, I think, another 20 years or 30 years, landed me at the Albuquerque Center for Spiritual Living, where I started doing some of that inner healing work. I started releasing some of those fears. I started gaining inner strength. I connected with the men in my classes and my groups. I started increasing my capacity to love as I got back in touch with that divine within me, and my circle of love started to expand again. I started to be able to include people that I had excluded for years. I'm trying to get through this without getting too emotional, but what I realized when I left that prison feeling so blessed, so overwhelmed with the beauty of these guys, I realized healing had taken place. And I'm sharing this with you not because I'm trying to brag, look what I did, I was able to heal. No, I'm sharing it because I believe that every one of us can heal from these kinds of hurts and injuries in our lives. I'm sharing it because I believe principle works the same for each and every one of us. It doesn't just work for me that way, it works for all of us. I'm sharing it because I know that we no longer have to stay stuck in our anger and our fear. I'm sharing it because I know that, as Petra said, we can take care of ourselves and create important boundaries while also remembering that everyone changes and evolves, even those behind bars. Even those behind literal bars in prisons, because those guys were so ready to love and so ready to be different in the world. And even those who are behind the prison walls that we've created for ourselves, the bars that we've created out of prejudice, out of fear, out of discomfort that's of our own making. Each one of us has a place where our comfort level butts up against discomfort. And each one of us has buttons that can get pressed. And they all look different. We all have different ones. And so I see it as that place where our ability to bring our light gives way to the darkness of prejudice and fear, hatred, resentment, whatever it is. And it's at that place where those two things meet that we have a healing zone, a place where we can heal, where we can just allow the spirit of who we are to expand and move out. As centers of God's activity, I challenge each and every one of us to spend some time at that edge. Spend some time seeking to push that edge a little bit out and possibly even overlapping with someone who's different and seeing what gets created. I believe that the days of comfortable theoretical like-mindedness have passed, that we are well grounded in this theory and in this teaching, that our centers are no longer isolated hubs of sameness, but rather that we are thriving expressions of God's diverse activity in the world. That we are unified in principle while expressing as individualized expressions of the one. And that we are ready to listen to difference. We're ready to listen so that we can understand on a deeper level. We're ready to listen with less judgment and more curiosity. We're ready to listen while we're rooted in love and the principles of oneness. As centers of God's activity, we're being called to do that now here as a center. We could call it radical inclusivity, we can call it radical listening, but we as the centers of spiritual living here in the heart of Las Cruces are getting ready to create listening tents where we're going to listen to people who don't even come here on Sunday. We're going to listen to people who are not steeped in this teaching. And we're going to listen to people who might be different, and you might be surprised where you find you have commonality. What matters is we're listening, Every second Saturday of the month, when we have our pancake breakfast, we'll have tents out here, and we're going to listen to people that we don't know, and maybe some people that we do know. And if you're not comfortable being a part of the listening tent, I challenge you this month to practice listening at home, with your families, with people in the grocery line. Just practice listening to people who might be expressing something different than you. Get curious and find out where you can overlap and create something new. As centers of love in action, and as centers of light in action, as we listen within, I believe we find our true center. We find that divine presence, and we can connect with that and move from that space. And we also listen out there. And as we listen to people out there, we find their divine center. I know for a fact that every single one of those guys in that prison have that divine center, and that's what I was able to connect with. Everyone has that divine center. And as we connect with that and as we listen to each other, that's what's going to heal not just ourselves, but this world. We are centers of God's activity, and we are listening, and we're listening to difference because it makes a difference. And so it is.